Hey, this is Darren, head of remote at GitLab, and I am joined today by Elisa at the Cowork Experience to talk about remote work. Thanks for joining me.
Hi, Darren. Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to pick your brain and chat a little bit more about remote working. I am the founder and host, or lead host for the Cowork Experience. And with that, I'll just go ahead and start asking you questions. All right, so we're here, right? So most organizations offer company-wide annuals or retreats, right? And now that more remote companies are coming up, it's becoming more of a standard, right? Do you envision these annual events becoming more competitive and evolving, especially with content and event locations and all those details?
I do. I think, especially for remote first and all remote companies where in-person interactions are limited by their nature, I think the diversity of the content as well as the location will become really important, almost seen as a perk. And I think they're likely to be less focused on work and more focused on personal bonding, because in an all remote setting, we get to work together all the time, but we don't get the in-person bonding all the time. So I think these events are more likely to be set up to get what is more rare in a all remote setting.
Yeah. I almost wonder, do you think for a lot of remote companies, as they develop their teams, do you think it could potentially be an oversight, or even more so an opportunity for there to be more focus in intimate engagements, like at the team or at the regional level?
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, GitLab is kind of running up on that now. So we've done an annual retreat, well, not quite annual, every 9 to 12 months, called GitLab Contribute. And we have one coming up in a few months. And at the time, we'll probably be around 1,200 people. And in years past, when it was a much smaller team, 10 people, 100 people, even 500 people, it's somewhat easier to manage getting all of those people together. But as it scales, we certainly want to get everyone together as much as we possibly can, but there is something to be said about getting teams, the sales team, the marketing team, individual teams, smaller subsets of teams that work together more intimately, get them together more often. Because I see tons of value in in-person bonding. In an all remote company, it's actually something most employees look forward to. Sometimes work retreats, if you're in a co-located setting, can be something that's a burden. It's something that you dread. It's like you commute to work every single day, and then you have this week-long thing where they're also asking you to go outside of your home to spend more time with these people that you already see all the time. A very different perspective in an all-remote setting where a lot of people kind of plan their vacations, they plan their years around this, because it's special. When you only get to see people a few times a year, you really savor those moments.
Yeah. It's funny that you say, you have like 1,200. That's massive, right? Because I would imagine that, my first thought is like, there's a fine line between having a great, fun, large group, and then when you start feeling like a number, right? So it's like you almost want to play that delicate dance, right?
Yeah, for sure. And I actually don't see anything wrong with doing both. So I think there's value in getting everyone together. So you let some serendipitous things happen when you get everyone in the same space. But also, teams, by their very nature, smaller teams will work together on a daily basis closely. And these are the opportunities to get those people together in a cool spot. And it doesn't necessarily have to be for quarterly planning or things like that. It can be based around it. But I do see value in that. All remote companies tend to attract people that love to explore. They're naturally curious. So travel is something that, for the most part, they look forward to. And so when you can weave travel in with getting to see people in person, there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I see that. Well, so one of the things I really focus on, so I do Cowork annuals, right, which is pretty much similar to what you guys do every 9 or so many months, right? It's like the company-wide party or the gathering. And then one of the things that I do quite often is Cowork retreats, right? It's the intimate settings, right? For the teams with different objectives and different scales, depending on what they're looking to do, right? For a company of GitLab size, or maybe not, do you see any hurdles or objections from a company's perspective in delivering like reoccurring intimate engagements? Maybe, and let me clarify, maybe a team doesn't have to see each other more than once a year, but maybe at least once a year in an intimate setting, formal intimate setting.
Yeah, the issues we run into is scheduling in mass. So if you're trying to coordinate 1,200 or more people and their schedules, it's very difficult to do. And in fact, somebody that I work with very closely, even though our next contribute is still 6 months out at the current time, she knows she's not going to be able to make it because she's getting married over the weekend that it overlaps. So, priorities, she's got to go get married.
Yeah.
But you just can't coordinate all of those schedules. So if you have more options for smaller groups, you're more likely to be able to line the schedules up. Another thing we deal with is, what do you do with your family and community back home? So in a remote first or an all remote setting, a lot of people choose to work in this setting because for whatever reason, they feel a draw to be home or near a community that matters to them. So when you pull someone away for a week-long event, you have to think about their partners or spouses back home, children back home. If they're a caregiver to an ill relative, something like that, what do you do back home? Do you invite the family to come along? Do you make arrangements for that? Do you support childcare or elderly care back home? You have to be sensitive to those kinds of things and consider it. And definitely make them optional because some people are in an all remote setting because they want or need to stay home most of the time. So it's not like they're indifferent to the company because they don't want to go, but you just have to be considerate of that.
That's true. That's really true. Okay. And then I guess, and GitLab may already do this or not, but do you think, or should there be more formal team building incentives for members? Because I've heard, people, remote companies encourage it. They say, yeah, we want you to go ahead and get some happy hour, but is there any formal incentive to get them to really invest some time?
Yeah, I'll give you a good example. At GitLab, we have an incentive called the visiting grant. And so essentially, if any GitLab member travels somewhere else to visit another GitLab member or multiple members, you're able to partially reimburse the trip. And there's no limit on that. And so actually early on in the company, we had a couple of folks that traveled around, I think it was all 6 continents. And they visited members on, well, not quite Antarctica, but they got to 6.
That's not bad.
And they expensed a lot of that, and they went around the world and across several releases, which was really amazing. And so we have a blog post on how they did that. And we want to incentivize and encourage people to get out there and travel. Not only does it build in-person interactions, but it encourages people to get out of their comfort zone, go immerse themselves in a new culture, maybe surround themselves with a new language, different food, different time zones. All of these things make you a more empathetic, compassionate, understanding person. And so we want to encourage that. I would caution, it could be easy for companies to say, we're saving all this money on real estate. We don't really want to just encourage people to go spend money to travel and see each other.
Right.
It's quick. Right. It's easy to fall into that rut, but I would say stay focused on how much money you're saving annually on having no real estate, no janitorial services, all of the things that go into maintaining one or more offices. Reinvest some of that savings back into your people in encouraging them to travel, because the net benefit of them traveling and building these bonds and immersing themselves in culture, it's one of those things where it will, the rising tide lifts all boats. And it's hard to quantify what the value is of having people face-to-face on their own travel schedules. But we've seen at GitLab over the years, it's really big. It's really cool. And people have traveled to different countries to be at weddings of other GitLabbers. I mean, that's really amazing. A lot of co-located companies would give a lot to have bonds built like that. So yes, it is a cost, but it's money worth spending. It's what we found.
It actually that's what that turns or converts employees from being just becoming how should I put this, instead of it becoming a retention effort, it becomes more of a what is it? They become loyalists, right? You become a loyalist of your employer because you see a family not only in your personal life, but you also see this within your professional, right? There's more attachment there.
For sure. And there's research that shows all remote and remote first companies have very high retention compared to co-located places. People value the autonomy and freedom that comes with it. And travel is just another element of that. If you're incentivized to travel, not too many companies will pay you to travel and go meet and have dinner with and work with your colleagues. And when you have colleagues all over the world, that's an amazing opportunity to make the world a smaller place and see somewhere you might not otherwise get to see unless you had a colleague there waiting for you.
You know, also there's one other thing I was thinking about too. I almost envision employee engagement, like these incentives that you do. Could they potentially in the future contribute to your kind of like your case for like credit, like work credit or performance credit? You know, as an employer makes these trips and makes these efforts to see their team members, that could that possibly be part of a case for promotion, saying like, look, I'm investing in my team. Like it becomes, you know, when I was a full-time employee back in the days, if I went and met up with my team members outside of the office, right, that I don't think that would ever been counted toward my growth, but I can almost see this being a new nuance to professional development, right?
One thing that I think we could potentially do is look at how many times the visiting grant is used in a given quarter or a given year and have a KPI or a metric around, we want to continually increase that number. So maybe not specify it to one person, because again, some people, if they're mobility challenged, even if they would want to travel extensively, they can't. So we don't want to hold that against any one individual, but I could see value in, as a company, doing what we can to see that go up. Just like we look at retention rates, we want retention rates to go up.
Yeah.
It could be argued that we would want visiting grant usage to go up as well, because that would be an indicator that people are leveraging it, they're aware of it, they feel comfortable using it. We're in a judgment-free zone where we actually want people to travel. So yeah, I like that idea. That would be a cool way to encourage the use of it, is have people operations or whoever would be responsible monitoring that KPI.
Kind of like count it, yeah. Okay, so kind of going into the work that I do at the Cowork Experience. So one of the things, the way I kind of separate myself, or like to see myself separated from a lot of the team building services you see out there, is the program design, right? Where the event model itself is really based on, you know, both the employer and the team members' growth objectives, right? It's not a co-work retreat. It's not a once-a-year annual that's just focused on work-centered content, right? It's also based on what the team members find relevant and useful for them in their personal lives, right? Whether it's relationships or investing or how to improve my health, right? Do you see value going beyond offering traditional work-based training, those kinds of topics in these face-to-face gatherings for teams?
I think it's essential, especially in all remote and remote first companies, because if you're getting people together, even semi-regularly, it needs to be about more than work, because you're able to work together very efficiently every single day using Slack and Zoom and various tools. What you're not able to do is get that in-person bonding experience around a shared event. It's more difficult. You can have virtual pizza parties and group co-working calls and things like that, which are all great, and we do that. We're very intentional about informal communication. But there's a next level of that, of bonding in person. And even at GitLab Contribute, we get everyone together. We are explicit about not doing death by PowerPoint. There's an opening keynote, a closing keynote, and then everything in between is people getting to know each other, going out and seeing and exploring wherever we are in the world. So much value can come from that. So there can be work elements sprinkled in, but for all remote teams, they want to get together and see people. They don't want to be burdened by work. We work all year long. Let's get together and actually enjoy being in each other's presence.
Oh, makes a lot of sense. So here's one topic that I am curious to know about, what, you know, the likes of GitLab would think. But some of the topics that I tend to cover in these co-work retreats is side hustle, you know, how to improve your side hustle, whether it's for a supplemental income or whether they want to possibly explore that path. And I think it's really common in today's culture that most people may have a side hustle. Um, you know, are we in a comfortable space now as an employer to embrace that team members may have a life outside and possibly have side hustles? Like, are we okay with that?
It's funny that you mentioned that. I feel like that's a defining line in kind of old school business mentality and new school progressive business mentality.
Yeah.
You'll find some companies that's a very hard and fast rule. You can never do anything outside of whatever
Yeah.
your full-time employment is. And then some of the more modern and progressive companies realize that people have other interests outside of work,
Yeah.
and they don't compete with what they're doing. They're very
Yeah.
different. They stretch a different side of their brain muscle. And as long as it's put forth and you're forthcoming about it and you're transparent about it and your manager approves of it and it's done at times that don't impact your work and productivity, I do think we're getting to a point where that is less frowned upon. And it's interesting because it's actually kind of rooted in ambition and wanting to educate yourself about something else and sort of continue expanding your knowledge base. So it's all about how it should be handled. One thing
Yeah.
I love about an all remote setting is you naturally have to trust people more. You aren't in a physical space together. You can't look over your shoulder. So the trust goes, it's not like the trust has boundaries. The trust would also include something like this. If you want to contribute to something else, as long as it's not competing and it's ran by your manager and your team, you can do it the right way, but it's not like you can't consider it. And a lot of side hustles actually turn into things that can be useful for the full-time employer. And I think in co-working spaces in particular, you run into people from all walks of life. So you're going to be exposed to all different types of things when you network. It's not like a siloed networking event with a co-located space where everyone does the same thing. So you get a lot of interesting people to talk to, and it can spark your curiosity. I say squashing that or putting people in a box is generally not what you want to do. That would kind of be my bottom line on that.
It's funny, it makes me think of a relationship, right? The more freedom that you feel that you have, the more loyal and committed you are for that primary relationship you have, right? It's like you don't want to let that go because they respect that.
Exactly right. It's like if you hire the right people and empower them and give them autonomy, the right people will respect that such that it creates a virtuous cycle that they will give back tremendously to continue getting that autonomy and empowerment. A lot of people have this fear that if you just ultimately empower people, they're going to run with it and exploit it and abuse it. I haven't really found that to be true because most people realize that if you do that, that's where it ends. So it would be wise to reward that empowerment and autonomy, not to exploit it.
That's good. That's good. That was something that has kind of wonder in the back, right? Because So all right. So there's okay. So I talk about the way I design my programs is there's a twofold piece to it. But in addition to that, the reason why I call it Cowork Experience. Cowork retreats, Cowork annuals, Cowork offsites is because the program itself, the centerpiece of our activity is co-working, right? So say we get together at an offsite or a retreat, we pretty much, you have your laptop, you're set up in this beautiful, inspiring setting, whether it's a museum, whether it's a cruise liner, whether it's a villa or the said retreat. And then surrounded by that, you have all these ongoing activities, right? All optional, right? You have workouts, you have self-development talks, you have food tastings, you have workshop skill set going on, right? It's quite different from the conventional agenda that you would probably get when you do get together for team building experiences, which is usually workshops and team days and maybe excursions, and that's fine. My question to you is, how much of an uphill battle would it be for a company, or maybe not, to kind of update its engagement, its program from the conventional to something that I'm bringing, I guess?
It's an interesting question. As you were asking it, it dawned on me that integrating co-work into the experience actually makes it a much more justifiable expense to the company. So how we've been thinking about it is it's primarily not work related. So you could zoom out a bit and say, well, you're basically spending this money just to get people together to bond. And yes, there's value in that, but it's hard to quantify. Whereas if there is some work element that's woven into it, you know you're going to get work done and you'll meet other people. And there could be some coordination where you specifically planned a program to work with another company or a similar industry where you wanted to learn information anyway. So instead of going to a seminar or a conference to learn about it, you say like, hey, would this company partner with us and work alongside of us? We just want to be in the same presence, which is really interesting. It's the uphill battle part is, I don't know that it would be so much of an uphill battle once the awareness is there. My biggest thing is, I don't think a lot of companies even know that this exists or this is a thing, or they could look to a third party to do it. It would almost be just redirecting the resources they currently spend on whatever their summit is to do something slightly differently. And maybe a matching program where you go to a company with 5 or 6 different options that you can match them with another company in a similar field or a slightly adjacent field. That might trigger some things about, hey, we could stand to learn a thing or two from these other companies.
Yeah, I have had, it's funny that you bring that up. I have had a few groups where it's a team of 5 and then I have another team of 5 or in a team of 3 here or 2, and they propose the idea, well, what about if you put all 4 of us together, all 4 teams together, and we go through that kind of experience where you're able to put an offsite or an experience like that for us together. But either way, I think you kind of hit something, an opportunity that I'll be exploring in the near future too. So I guess one of my last questions is really just kind of circling back to the beginning of where this all started. So do you really think we are getting to a time in this work culture where we need to put more investment in how we formally bring our teams together and bring them together productively beyond the once-a-year annual or local holiday party?
Yeah, I do, especially as a remote team. I think teams have commonly gathered themselves to do things like quarterly planning or quarterly wrap-ups, these sort of natural inflection points in the business calendar. But they generally don't have a lot of positivity around them. They're more like, well, we have to do this. Like, oh, we have to plan for the next quarter, or like we have to wrap up the quarter. And why not make it something that we look forward to? And it doesn't necessarily have to be tied to this big planning thing where this specific outcome has to happen, especially in remote companies where people can battle with isolation and they do want to see in-person interactions. It's a proving ground for what this could be. I definitely envision this as something that could almost be a choose your own adventure. I could see something like a certain team knowing that they're going to do two or three of these a year, and you implement a voting system of where are we going to go? Here are a few options, and you almost put it to a test, and maybe somebody's really familiar with a place and they're excited to help plan that. These are the things that if you make it more interactive for people, they're more likely to be invested in it and get something out of it. And especially with remote, bringing people together and traveling to do it is an amazing perk that should be taken advantage of. I see it. We're at a cool moment in time where we're still as an industry figuring out how to do remote well, and something like this is popping up at a good time because it will add some process and actually some excitement around getting people together and encourage and incentivize them to do it. One thing I've found is that people that join remote companies for the first time, so if they spent their whole career in a co-located setting and then they just start working from home, the common thing is to just bring all the habits that they had from a co-located setting and then try to do that in the home, and it doesn't really fit well. But then there's the thing of no one has ever taught these people to design their life around a remote environment. How do I take advantage of that? What options do I have? My travel has always been booked for me. I've always had someone in the office to do that. Now I don't do that. How do I arrange getting together with my colleagues and ensure that I'm not inconveniencing them? So putting something in place to help people do that, I don't think people don't want to do it. They just might need a little encouragement on how to actually plan something like that.
Yeah. Actually, that's even that in itself would be a great talk or a talking point or a session within the Cowork retreats. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Darren. I think those are all my questions for you. Did you have any questions for me? Or are you done for the day?
No, I'll shoot one question your way. I'm just curious if you've had any early success stories or anecdotes from bringing remote teams, either small or large, together into something like this, especially if it's been their first experience, and how is that different than a typical annual retreat?
Yes, I have actually. I've gotten quite a few testimonials. I would say there's a lot more of an emotional response I've seen, and I think that's why I'm so passionate about this. You know, going to another annual, it doesn't feel to them, at least based on what I've gathered, it's another annual. But when they've done something like this, when they've done a Cowork offsite with me or a Cowork retreat, they feel like they've gotten a spa, they feel like they were productive, they feel like they've gotten some growth, they feel like so recharged in all aspects. It's a very striking kind of impact that I've seen that I don't really see very often. You know, I've hosted quite a bit of events, and from parties to tastings and to this, and it's quite a stark difference in the way they've seen growth and what they've gotten out of it. It's really meaningful for them.
Have you worked with any co-located companies, or have these all been remote companies?
All remote, all remote. It's funny, I have thought about possibly making this more available for co-located companies. It's a different kind of approach for them, right? It's a little bit of a different, because when they see my work, they see this more as, okay, maybe so I can train up our sales team, or maybe more top performers, which I'm not saying it can't be used for that, but for them to think of this as something ongoing and reoccurring for different parts, different departments and different groups of all levels and scales is not a model that they're used to thinking, right? As opposed to a remote-based company, that's something that's that they're very cognizant about, right?
Yeah, that's awesome. I'll close with this. Where are you traveling to next?
I'm in Thailand. I just came back from Bali, and I'm going to Austin, back to home for Thanksgiving. So
very cool. And where can our listeners learn more about what you do?
Pretty much on Twitter, the Cowork EXP, as well as Instagram, the Cowork Experience, and Facebook as well. I'm in all those 3 areas. But if you have any questions, anyone wants to send me anything, I'm at Elisa at coworkexperience.com.